Okay, so ready to dive into some UFOs?
Always?
Or I guess we should say UAPs, unidentified aerial phenomena.
Right. Got to be up to date with the terminology. Though everyone still knows them as UFOs, so.
Exactly. And we're going way beyond those blurry photos you've seen. We're going to get into some serious academic work on this. For this deep dive, we actually went back and listened to an interview with Dr. Michael Cohn, a philosopher of science.
Who also, by the way, founded the Society for UAP Studies.
Right. And their academic journal, Lumina.
He's doing the work.
Really interesting stuff. But before we get into his story, we should probably talk about why some scientists and academics are even taking UAPs seriously.
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to the evidence. And not even evidence that was meant to be collected. We're talking about, like, radar operators who are just doing their jobs, tracking planes, and suddenly they pick up something moving crazy fast, like unbelievably fast.
Stuff that just shouldn't be possible.
Exactly. And those kinds of stories, those unexpected encounters, they really make you wonder what's going on up there.
It's like they accidentally stumbled onto something huge.
Totally.
And that's actually kind of similar to how Dr. Cohn got involved in this whole UAP thing. So picture this. He's a philosophy professor recovering from COVID, and he comes across this podcast with a former NASA physicist.
Okay, so already I'm hooked. Former NASA physicist talking UAPs. That's not something you hear every day.
Right, so this physicist, he wasn't just speculating. He had done actual calculations based on what people were reporting, on radar data, specifically from those USS Nimitz encounters back in 2004.
Oh yeah, the Nimitz encounters. Those are like legendary in UAP circles.
Definitely. But for anyone who might not know, can you give us a quick rundown of what happened?
So basically you had all these Navy pilots, experienced pilots, who reported seeing this weird tic-tac shaped object. And this thing was moving in ways that just defied physics, hovering, accelerating at insane speeds, dropping thousands of feet in seconds.
And it wasn't just like one pilot seeing things, right? They had multiple witnesses and they had it on radar.
Exactly. And that's what really got to Dr. Cohn. Like, he was listening to this podcast, this physicist is laying out all the data, and he's like, hold on, something's not adding up here.
Yeah.
So he starts digging deeper, doing his own research, and he realizes there are only a few possibilities. Either these pilots, these trained professionals, are all lying, or their equipment was malfunctioning.
Or they actually saw something truly unusual.
Exactly. And the idea that something unexplainable might be happening up there, that's a lot more interesting to a philosopher of science than a mass hallucination or a technical glitch. So Dr. Cohn, he keeps researching, and he starts thinking about UAPs in this really interesting way. He says they exist in this kind of in-between space.
In between? What does that even mean?
Right, it's a little abstract. He actually uses the word liminal, which anthropologists use to describe those rites of passage in some cultures, you know, like when someone's transitioning from childhood to adulthood. They're not one or the other, but in between.
Okay, I'm starting to see where he's going with this.
So UAPs, they're kind of like that. We look up and we think we see something familiar, maybe an aircraft of some kind, but then it does things that are completely alien to our understanding of physics, how things should move.
So we're talking about something that looks kind of familiar, but acts totally bizarre.
Exactly. And that's what makes them so fascinating and so frustrating to study.
So we've got these mind-blowing accounts from Navy pilots, a former NASA physicist crunching numbers, a philosophy professor going down a rabbit hole, and this idea of a liminal space between the known and the unknown. It's a lot to take in.
It really is. Yeah. And this is where Dr. Cohn's background as a philosopher of science really comes into play. He starts to see this need for a whole new approach to studying UAPs, something he actually calls UAP studies.
Not just lumping it in with astronomy or physics, but treating it as its own distinct field.
Exactly. He even goes on to found the Society for UAP Studies, with the goal of bringing together scientists, researchers, academics from all different disciplines.
To tackle this mystery from all angles, because if you think about it, it's not just about physics.
Right. You've got the human element, too. How do people perceive these encounters? What are the psychological and sociological factors at play?
It's like a giant puzzle, and you need all these different pieces to see the whole picture.
Exactly.
So Dr. Cohn isn't just advocating for more research on UAPs. He's saying we need to change the entire way we approach this subject.
Exactly. And he argues that it's not even necessarily about proving or disproving the existence of aliens.
It's bigger than that.
It's about looking at all this evidence, the radar data, the eyewitness accounts, even potential physical traces, and saying, okay, what can we learn from this? What does this tell us about our current understanding of the universe, about our place in it?
Because maybe, just maybe, there's something truly groundbreaking out there waiting to be discovered. But we'll never find it if we're not willing to look.
It's about approaching this whole thing with a sense of curiosity, sure, but also with some rigor.
Yeah.
Not just jumping to conclusions. Like, we see something weird in the sky and it's easy to just go, oh, it's just a plane, or it's probably a weather balloon. But Dr. Cohn would want us to slow down a little, look at the actual evidence and ask, what if it's something else? Something we haven't even considered.
So, being more open-minded, challenging our own assumptions about what we think we know, which I guess is where this whole idea of a multi-generational research program comes in, right?
Right.
What does that even mean? It sounds pretty intense, like scientists working on a project for decades and then passing it on like a torch to the next generation.
Yeah, that's actually a really good way to think about it. Dr. Cohn's point is that studying UAPs, if we're going to do it right, it takes a long-term commitment. It can't just be a few years here and there of funding and then it dries up.
Yeah.
He compares it to how scientists used to view the study of consciousness.
Which was not favorably.
Not at all. Too subjective, too mysterious, too many unknowns.
But then something changed, right?
Right. Researchers figured out ways to actually study consciousness scientifically, right? Measuring brain activity, mapping those neural pathways. And as they got deeper into it, they realized just how complex and fascinating it really is. And Dr. Cohn thinks the same thing could happen with UAPs, if we take it seriously, if we're willing to really dig in and be open to what we might find.
It's like that saying, the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. Right? Like the universe is just full of these mysteries, and sometimes we need a whole new way of looking at things to even begin to understand them. But okay, I have to ask, how do you actually study something as unpredictable and, well, frankly, weird as UAPs? Like, what does that even look like in practice?
Well, he talks about this in the podcast, and it might be a little surprising. He says we need to shift our focus a bit. Instead of getting caught up in proving or disproving aliens, we should really be focusing on just understanding the phenomena themselves.
So less about, are UFOs real, and more about, okay, what are we actually seeing and what does that tell us?
Exactly. He uses the example of observing, collecting data, analyzing it, coming up with theories. The scientific method.
Right. Back to basics.
Exactly. And he even says that even if some, or even most, UAPs turn out to have totally normal explanations, the process of investigating them rigorously, that's still valuable.
Because it pushes us to expand our knowledge, to ask new questions.
And maybe even develop new technologies and ways of doing things. Yeah. He actually uses a really interesting analogy in the interview. He talks about how, for centuries, humans were totally obsessed with flying.
We looked at birds, right? Trying to figure out how they did it.
Exactly. We studied their wings, tried to copy their movements, all of that. But it wasn't until we actually discovered the principles of aerodynamics, the whole lift and drag thing, that we were able to build machines that could actually fly.
And even then, our first attempts were pretty basic compared to what we can do now.
Oh, for sure. Like night and day compared to the jets and supersonic aircraft we have now.
It's incredible.
It is. And imagine if we could get that close to a UAP. If we could study its propulsion system, figure out what it's made of, how it's controlled, who knows what kind of crazy technological advancements we could make.
It's like a glimpse into the future. Warp drives, zero-point energy, stuff that sounds like science fiction but could totally revolutionize everything.
And Dr. Cohn argues that this possibility, this potential, it's worth investing a lot more in UAP research. He points out that we're potentially talking about the biggest scientific discovery ever, and yet it's severely underfunded, often dismissed as fringe science.
Which seems kind of backwards.
Right. It makes you think, what if we dedicated even a fraction of the resources we put into other research areas into studying UAPs? Who knows what we could learn?
Right, and it's not like we're short on data, really.
Not at all. We've got decades worth of eyewitness reports, radar readings, photographs, even some videos out there. Now, granted, not all of it is going to be credible.
Right. Got to be discerning.
Absolutely. But there are some compelling cases, like those USS Nimitz encounters. You've got multiple credible witnesses, military-grade radar data. We even have that infrared video footage.
Hard to argue with that. And yet, for the most part, mainstream science still seems hesitant to really engage with this stuff. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think there's a few factors at play. There's definitely still a stigma attached to it, the whole association with science fiction, conspiracy theories, you name it.
It's like some people are afraid it'll ruin their reputation if they take it too seriously.
Exactly. And Dr. Cohn argues that this kind of self-censorship, it's actually really damaging. For science to advance, We have to be able to openly discuss and investigate these things without worrying about what other people will think.
Because what's more important? Protecting your reputation, or potentially making a huge scientific breakthrough. If there really is something strange happening in our skies, don't we have an obligation to at least try to understand it?
Absolutely, and that's where his idea of epistemic humility comes in.
Okay, hold on. We've got to unpack that one. Epistemic humility. It sounds very philosophical and a little intimidating.
It does sound complicated, right? But it's actually a pretty straightforward concept. It basically boils down to acknowledging that we don't know everything. Like, there might be things out there that we simply don't understand and maybe never will.
So you're saying even if we threw all of our resources, all the smartest people in the world at the UAP mystery, there's no guarantee we'd ever solve it completely?
Maybe not, but that's okay. Dr. Cohn compares it to quantum mechanics. Scientists have been studying that for a century, and some of it is still a total head-scratcher. We can make predictions, but the underlying reality, still a mystery.
It's true. Like, we have these incredibly precise equations for quantum phenomena, but the why behind it all, still elusive.
Exactly. And UAPs might be the same way. Maybe they operate on principles that are just so foreign to our current understanding of physics and technology that we'll never fully grasp them. Not in the traditional scientific sense, anyway.
Okay, so if we might never fully understand UAPs, even with all the research in the world, why bother at all? So if we might never have all the answers when it comes to UAPs, even with tons of research, why bother? Why even try?
It's a good question, and Dr. Cohn actually addresses it head-on in the podcast. He says, look, even if some things about UAPs stay mysterious, the journey of trying to figure them out, that's just as important as actually having all the answers.
Yeah.
Every question we ask, it's like, it expands what we know and opens up even more questions.
It's like those old explorers, right? Setting out to explore a new land. They don't know what they'll find, but the exploring itself is what matters.
Exactly. And think about all the times in history when people believe things that we know now are totally wrong, like the Earth being flat or diseases being caused by evil spirits. But we figured those things out by observing and questioning what we thought we knew. So who's to say we can't do the same with UAPs?
So what you're saying is, even if we never totally solve the UAP thing just by trying, we might make other discoveries, maybe even change the world.
Exactly. It could change how we see physics, astronomy, even our place in the universe. And it's not just about the science either. There's the whole philosophical side of it too. Like, what if we are not alone in the universe? That would make us rethink everything we thought we do about ourselves.
Right.
Our history, everything.
It's a lot to wrap your head around, but in a good way. It's exciting to think about all the possibilities. So for our listeners, for anyone who wants to learn more about UAPs, what should they do? Where do they go from here?
Well, Dr. Cohn, he actually gives some pretty good advice at the end of the podcast. He says to be curious, definitely, but also to be a little skeptical. Don't believe everything you hear. Do your own research, ask questions, and be open-minded to the idea that there might be more to this whole thing than we can even imagine right now.
Don't just go down the rabbit hole without, checking to see where it leads first, right?
Right. And he mentions that the Society for UAP Studies and their journal, Limina, those are really great places to start if you want to learn more about the actual research that's being done.
It's peer-reviewed, right, so it's legit.
Exactly. And they're building a community of people who are all working on this together, which is really cool.
And don't forget about all the stories out there. Like Dr. Cohn talked about how UAPs have been a part of our culture for a long time. We see it in movies, TV, even just stories people tell each other.
Totally. And he says it's good to think about those stories, not as proof of anything, but as a way of exploring our own hopes and fears about the unknown. Because when you get right down to it, UAPs, they're about more than just data and science, They're about our relationship with the universe and all the big questions we have about our place in it.
It's a good reminder that there's still so much out there that we don't know, that the universe is full of, wonders and mysteries. And who knows, maybe some of those mysteries, maybe they really are stranger than fiction. So stay curious, everyone. Keep asking those what-if questions, because as we've learned from this deep dive on UAPs, those what-ifs, they can lead to some pretty amazing places. Stonehenge. It's almost like you say the word and everybody goes, ooh, mysterious rolls, these giant stones just standing out there for millennia. And we're still no closer to really knowing why they're there. I mean, it's not like the ancient Egyptians, they left us hieroglyphics, pretty much instruction manuals. But with Stonehenge, the stones themselves are pretty much all we've got. And one stone, well, let's just say it's been a real head-scratcher. We're diving into the enigma of the altar stone, this key piece of the Stonehenge puzzle. And it's really only recently that it started to give up some of its secrets. You know how sometimes you just get a feeling about something? Like, it just calls to you? That's how I feel about Stonehenge. Picture this, all right? Cool.
Yeah.
I complain, here on Salisbury Plain, sun's out, got a nice breeze. And boom, there they are, these massive stones, just incredible, rough-hewn, quarried nearby. But then you look closer and you see them. Smaller stones, kind of a bluish tint, scattered around. The blue stones. And almost hidden among them is the altar stone. Now, this isn't just some random rock, you know? This thing's nearly twice the size of those other blue stones, and it's got this unique look to it. It's this gray-green sandstone. And for the longest time, nobody knew where it came from. I mean, we knew where the smaller blue stones came from.
Yet geologists had already traced those back to the Presley Hills in Wales. Rock types match perfectly. But the altar stone, that was a whole other story, a real mystery until, well, pretty recently, actually.
And that's where this whole thing takes a turn, a really fascinating one. Imagine you're a geologist, right? You've spent years on this stuff, and then you get an email. One email changes everything. And it's not from some big shot researcher, no. It's from a PhD student, Anthony Clark, over in Perth, Australia, Curtin University. And get this, he wasn't even studying Stonehenge. He was focused on, now get this, Australian mining practices. I mean, talk about a long shot. But here's the thing. His research involves some really, really cutting-edge geological dating techniques, the kind of stuff they've perfected down under, you know, finding gold and all that. And those techniques, as it turned out, were the key to the altar stone.
So Anthony's work, it involved analyzing these microscopic grains inside the stone. You could almost call it the stone's geological fingerprint. Tiny little time capsules. And by looking at these, they could figure out exactly where the stone came from with incredible accuracy.
It's mind-blowing what they can do with technology now, right? But, okay, so they had the fingerprint, they had the tech, but they still had to find a match. That meant comparing it to samples from all over the British Isles, like some giant game of Where's Waldo, but with rocks.
Oh, it was a massive undertaking, no doubt, meticulously comparing the altar stone's fingerprint to samples from everywhere, Ireland, the French coast, you name it. But what they found, well, that's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, so they're looking for this match, right? This geological needle in a haystack. And where do they find it? Not England, not even Wales.
Scotland. Northwest Scotland, to be precise. Over 700 kilometers from Stonehenge.
700 kilometers. Are you serious? That's like, what's that in American? Like 500 miles? That's insane.
It is pretty mind-boggling when you think about it. Imagine dragging a massive stone that distance with the technology they had back then.
Okay, hold on, back up a sec. For those of us who maybe weren't paying attention in history class, what exactly does Neolithic even mean?
Good point. Neolithic refers to a period in human history roughly 10,000 years ago. It's when we see the first real signs of agriculture, settled communities, that sort of thing, villages popping up, people starting to farm, and of course building incredible monuments like Stonehenge.
Yeah. Right. So these Neolithic folks, they weren't just messing around. They were organized, they had skills, and they were definitely getting around, literally.
But why, though? Why go through all that for one stone, from that one specific place all the way to Stonehenge?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? This discovery really throws a wrench in what we thought we knew about these people. It suggests a level of planning, of long-distance connection that we hadn't even considered.
700 kilometers with a giant rock. That's commitment.
No kidding. We're talking mountains, rivers, who knows what else they had to deal with. And remember, this wasn't just a one-off either. This discovery got researchers thinking about other Neolithic sites.
Like those stone circles up in, what is it, the Orkney Islands?
Exactly, the Orkneys. They're an archipelago off the north coast of Scotland. And they're home to a whole bunch of Neolithic sites. Stone circles, villages, even tombs.
All dating back to roughly the same time as Stonehenge.
So it's not just like a bunch of random stones, right? We're talking about a whole network of communities here, spread out over hundreds of miles. And they're sharing knowledge, beliefs, maybe even working together on huge projects like Stonehenge. It's like that altar stone journey wasn't just about moving a rock. It was about connecting with something way bigger.
Absolutely. And you know what this does for our understanding of the Neolithic period? It's huge. It challenges everything we thought we knew about these people, makes you realize just how sophisticated they were, how connected across these vast differences.
So the question is why? Why go to all that effort? Was it purely practical? Like, did they just need a big old stone and the Scottish one was, I don't know, the best they could find?
Well, that's always a possibility. But there's another side to this, a more symbolic one.
You mean like the stories, the beliefs?
Exactly. Imagine what kind of significance a stone brought from so far away might have held.
It's like it becomes more than just a stone then, right? It's like a relic.
Right, a physical embodiment of those connections, those beliefs.
And bringing it to Stonehenge, that would be a way of linking all these different communities together, creating a shared identity.
That's one way to think about it.
Man, it's like we're trying to decipher a conversation from 10,000 years ago. We can see what they left behind, the stones, the structures, but we're still figuring out what it all means.
And that's the beauty of archaeology, isn't it? Always more to learn.
I mean, think about it. Every time we think we've got a handle on the past, bam! Something like this pops up and throws everything for a loop.
It's humbling, really.
So next time you see a picture of Stonehenge, or maybe you're lucky enough to actually go there, take a second to think about that altar stone, that Scottish giant. Think about the journey it made, the people who moved it.
The world they lived in.
Because discoveries like this, they remind us that history is more than just dates and names in a textbook. It's a story.
A story that's still being written.
And who knows what other secrets are still out there, just waiting to be discovered. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time. Ever get that feeling like there might be something more to meditation? You know, beyond just relaxing and unwinding, maybe even like unlocking some hidden potential.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're diving deep today into a study that explored this, and trust me, the results are pretty mind-blowing.
It's true. This isn't your average medication helps you chill out kind of study.
Right.
Researchers at the University of Virginia wanted to pit meditation against not a placebo, but a structured workout routine.
Interesting. So like head-to-head, meditation versus exercise.
Exactly. And get this, they didn't use like Zen masters or anything. It was everyday people who'd never meditated before.
Okay, so like a real-world test then.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about a study published just this year where they basically flipped a coin to decide who'd learn meditation and who'd follow an exercise program.
Yeah, like heads you meditate, tails you hit the gym.
Exactly. And they did that to make sure it was fair, right?
Exactly. It's called a randomized trial. And it's like the gold standard for figuring out if something actually works.
Yeah.
Because it levels the playing field between the two groups.
Got it, got it. So before we get to the really wild stuff...
Oh, there's wild stuff.
Oh, yeah. But first, let's talk about well-being in general. Because isn't that what everyone's after these days?
Right. Feeling good?
And not surprisingly, the study found that both groups, the meditators and the exercisers, saw improvements in their anxiety and overall health.
That makes sense.
And the researchers even said, I'm quoting here, that this could have interesting implications for designing future wellness programs. Basically, whether you're team meditation or team treadmill, there's a proven path to feeling better.
I like that because it really highlights that both meditation and exercise have their own unique benefits when it comes to well-being, which is something a lot of research has shown before.
Totally. It's like having your cake and eating it too. Or maybe more like choosing between a green smoothie and a satisfying run.
I love that analogy.
But I gotta add, this study only followed people for 8 weeks. So, you know, more research is needed to see what happens long term.
8 weeks is a good start, though, right? Gives us a glimpse.
Totally. Okay, so shifting gears a bit here, let's talk about mindfulness. You know, that whole being present and aware in the moment kind of thing. That's where meditation shined.
It did. They found that the meditation group got way better at something they called acting with awareness.
Okay, before we go any further, can we break that down a bit? Acting with awareness? What does that even mean practically?
Sure. It's about, like, making conscious choices instead of just going through the motions. Like, say you're driving home from work. Someone acting with awareness would be paying attention to the route, their surroundings, and even their own thoughts and feelings at that moment. But someone not doing that, they might drive home and not even really remember the journey. Their mind was somewhere else.
Okay, so like being present in the driver's seat? Literally.
Exactly.
I like it. But here's the curveball. While the exercisers weren't as good at this whole acting with awareness thing, they actually got better at handling tough emotions.
Interesting, right? And that's actually a key finding from this study.
Yeah, because it kind of hints that while meditation might make you more aware in general, exercise might be the key to dealing with those negative emotions. Which, I mean, who knew breaking a sweat could be so good for you emotionally? Those endorphins, man.
They're powerful.
Powerful stuff. But this is just the tip of the iceberg, folks. Remember we mentioned a paranormal twist?
Oh, yeah, the paranormal twist?
Well, Buckle up because things are about to get really interesting as we dig into that side of the study.
It can be a little out there, for sure.
Yeah, out there is putting it mildly. We're talking about what they called paranormal experiences and also noetic. Those were the terms they used in the research.
Right, and I know those words can sound kind of, I don't know, like straight out of some sci-fi flick.
Totally.
But they're really just referring to those experiences that people report. Like,
Mm.
pretty often, actually, things like, precognition, where you kind of know what's going to happen before it does.
Yeah.
Or like telepathy, the whole mind-to-mind communication thing.
Basically, stuff that seems like, I don't know, it bends the rules of how we think the world's supposed to work, you know? And the wild part is a lot of those, like, ancient meditation traditions, they believe that this stuff is actually just a natural outcome of practicing meditation deeply over time.
Yeah, it's like unlocking something within you.
So did they end up with a bunch of, like, psychic meditators in this study?
Well, not exactly. It's not that simple.
Okay, so what did they find?
The meditation group, they did report having more of those experiences that they would label paranormal by the end of the 8 weeks.
Interesting. But it sounds like there's a but coming.
Well, there's a bit more to it.
I figured.
So to really see what was going on, those researchers, they went beyond just asking people about their experiences, right?
Yeah.
They wanted something more objective, so they used what's called a random number generator.
What's that, like a special machine or something?
Kind of. It's a way to test for stuff that would be super unlikely to happen just randomly, by chance.
Okay, so give me an example. Like if I flipped a coin 100 times, it wouldn't be normal to get heads every single time.
Exactly. That's the idea. So they used this random number generator, right? And when they looked at the results, they didn't actually find any big differences between our meditators and our exercise group.
So people meditating were reporting more weird experiences, but there wasn't any, like, hard proof that they were actually, like, psychic or anything.
Yeah, that's kind of the gist of it.
Man, my head's spinning now. Okay, so to make sure I'm following along here, the study actually breaks this down in more detail, right? They have those tables of data?
They do, yeah. And those tables actually give a really interesting picture of what people were reporting.
Okay, so, like, what kind of stuff? Give me the highlights.
So, for example, in the meditation group, they were more likely to say they had things like out-of-body experiences.
Whoa, really? Okay, getting kind of X-Files now.
Right, or like unexpected healings either for themselves or someone they knew. Even things like seeing energy fields around people.
Okay, yeah, now we're definitely in the Twilight Zone.
Totally. But, and this is important, they also found that the meditators, they were more likely to report feeling anxious or scared at times during the study, too.
So it's not all, like, bliss and psychic powers?
No, not at all. And that's something really key to point out, I think. It's like exploring these parts of your awareness, even with something like meditation, it's not always going to be sunshine and rainbows, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense. So we've got this mix of more weird stuff being reported, but no real proof that meditation is what's causing it. Help me out here. What's the bottom line for our listeners?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that in science, just because two things happen together, it doesn't automatically mean one thing caused the other. Correlation isn't the same as causation, right?
Right. Like, just because I start meditating and then see a UFO, it doesn't mean the meditation summoned it.
Exactly. There could be other explanations for what's going on.
So, like, what? Give us the rundown. Okay, so walk me through those other explanations then. Why might meditation seem to go hand in hand with these strange experiences, even if it's not, like, giving you superpowers?
Well, one thought is that meditation, it's like, it makes you more aware of all those subtle things going on inside, you know, your thoughts, feelings, even physical sensations.
Yeah, because you're spending all that time paying attention to your breath, your body.
It's like you're turning up the volume on your own internal radar system.
And so you start picking up on things you might have missed before.
Right. Like a weird feeling, a sudden image, just something that pops into your head. Now, if you already believe in paranormal stuff, you might interpret those things differently.
Instead of just being like, huh, that was weird, you might think it's a vision or something.
Exactly. It's all about interpretation. What someone else might brush off as nothing, you might see as deeply meaningful.
So, almost like finding a $20 bill on the sidewalk. It's not that you suddenly manifested it. You're just more tuned in to what's already there.
I like that. A perfect analogy. And then, of course, there's the whole expectation thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you go into a meditation study thinking you might get psychic powers, you're more likely to interpret anything unusual that happens in that way.
It's like seeing shapes in the clouds, right? Our brains just love to find patterns, even when they're not really there.
Exactly. We're pattern-seeking machines.
This is all so fascinating, but it does feel like we're left with more questions than answers. What's the biggest takeaway for our listeners, especially those who are new to all of this?
For me, it really just drives home the point that there is still so much we don't know about our minds, about consciousness itself.
It's like we've been exploring this whole time with a little flashlight, and suddenly, bam, someone flips on the stadium lights. There's so much more to see than we ever imagined.
I love that, and that's what's so exciting.
Totally. What would you say to someone listening who's like, okay, this is all mind-blowing, but what does it mean for me?
I'd say don't get too caught up in trying to find all the answers.
Hmm.
The point isn't necessarily to prove or disprove the paranormal. It's more about just opening our minds to the possibilities.
It's about the journey, not just the destination.
Exactly. It's about acknowledging that there are still mysteries out there, and that exploring those mysteries can be an incredibly enriching experience in itself, even if we never have all the answers.
That's such a great point. It's about the curiosity, the wonder of it all. So, to you listening, what resonates with you from all of this? Does it make you want to try meditation to see what comes up in your own experience? Or maybe it just deepens that curiosity about the human mind, about what we're truly capable of?
We're all capable of so much more than we realize, I think.
So true. And as we've seen today, sometimes the most amazing discoveries start with a single question and a mind that's open to exploring the possibilities.
The future of consciousness research is wide open. I can't wait to see what we discover next.
Me neither. Until next time, everyone, keep diving deep and keep those minds open.